Hey everyone, welcome back for part 4 of the restoration series on this Cut N-33H Rondine turntable. In the last video, you'll recall that we took the time to do some modification to get the new Tonearm mount to fit into the turntable base, and then we took some time right at the end to sand down the plinth and prep it for refinish. Now you'll notice that the plinth is not refinished at this point, and that's because the weather this week has decided that it's going to continuously rain. So we're going to do this in sort of a backwards fashion. What we're going to do is we're going to start with reassembly on this turntable, and then toward the end of the video we'll go ahead and get the plinth refinished and get the base remounted in it permanently. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and start on the reassembly process. The entirety of it will be recorded, but what we're going to do is I'm just going to kind of cut in snippets. Since everybody got to see the teardown on the first video, I don't figure it's really necessary to watch the full reassembly process, except for to highlight things that I think might be interesting or necessary to cover. With that said, let's go ahead and get started on reassembly. So the very first thing that we need to do in the reassembly process on this is get the motor mount put back on. The reasoning for that is when we did the teardown on this, the first thing we took off was the capacitor. But underneath the capacitor mount we had this, which is a grounding strap for the motor, and that was attached to the same point as the capacitor mounting bracket on the old capacitor. In order to get this back on in the right order, the motor is going to have to go back on the base first, and in order to do that we have to have the motor mount on first. So that's the first part that we're going to put on. Alright, motor mount is on. Let's go ahead and get the motor put back on here. Wiring goes that orientation back in. The screw hole are the standard spacers, and the screw hole right here is the spring spacer. Now make sure that the motor still spins, which looks like it does just fine. Excellent. Alright, we're still not screwing things all the way down, tightening it all the way up yet. When you're doing reassembly on equipment, I don't care whether it's a turntable or a drone or a PC or what, you always, when you have full assemblies like this and they're going to attach to other assemblies, you loose fit it back into place, and then as things get put back in, then you've got the ability to adjust things around as they need to be so that they fit back together properly. If you just tighten it all back down as you put each piece in, then you inevitably end up having to back screws out and loosen things up, because things don't just slide right back into place as exactly they should. You're always going to have to do adjustments on things. Alright, so the motor's back in now. Now we can go ahead and flip the table on to its bottom so that we can put the filter capacitor back in, and then we'll go ahead and wire that back up. Okay, the next part to go back on here is the capacitor. That's this guy. We 3D designed and printed up a mount for the new one. I've already got the screw in here, and you'll notice that the capacitor is not all the way in yet. That's so I can get the screw down. The strap from the motor goes underneath that screw, so we'll flatten this out real quick so that it'll fit under there properly. Alright, we are on. That is good. Now I'm going to have to rotate this around a little bit to work on it. I know that this was the orientation that this capacitor was in when we took out the old one. However, it was, as you'll recall, kind of lifted and pointed like this, so I was able to get at the wiring relatively easily. That's a little bit more difficult here, so we're going to go ahead and rotate the table and then get this soldered up. Okay, we have the table rotated now. You'll remember when we took this apart, we had 3 wires off the motor. We've got a green line frame on this. Yes, we had a green, we had a yellow, and we've got a red wire. The green goes on, well, really it can be either side of the capacitor. This isn't polarized, but just for the sake of consistency, the green goes on the top terminal here, along with this green wire. Both of those need to go there. The yellow goes on the other side of the capacitor by itself, and then the red ties back in down here on the other side of the line cord with an electrical wire nut. That guy. So we're going to go ahead and take the terminal cover boot that we had here. We're going to just run the yellow and the green from this side back on through, probably some of the red too, so we've got, can get it back far enough and don't burn it. And then we need to run the other end of the green on through there as well. Where did you go? Okay. We'll go ahead and get our soldering iron tinned up and start soldering things back onto the new capacitor. We have the soldering back on now. We got green wires on this side, yellow on the other. Go ahead and pull the red back out of there and move the boot back on. Excellent. Not exactly factory, as evidenced by the printed bracket, but with what I've got, that's about as close as it's going to get. That is the capacitor and the motor back in, so those are the 2 big major parts on the bottom of this. Now the next step on this is going to be to put the platter and the platter bearing back on here. And then we're going to move on to get the new platter motor belt on here and see if this platter spins like it's supposed to. Before we do that though, we're going to go ahead and stick this back in the base temporarily and plug this back in and make sure I haven't messed up anything with wiring. The motor is still spinning and that it's spinning the correct direction. Alright, so we're back on the base, and I've got the power switch back on, and I've got the table plugged into power. Now, if this works right, this will start spinning, and it should spin in that direction. So let's give it a try, make sure we didn't mess anything up. Good deal. Seems much quieter to me than when I did the initial filming of the first video for this. You didn't get to hear it in the first video, but when I went to wind this up the first time, this motor was extremely noisy. I think the combination of the new motor damper grommets and the new motor filter capacitors helped that situation quite a bit. So we'll go ahead and turn this off. The next thing we'll do is get the platter bearing back in and the platter set back on here, and then we'll go ahead and put the belt back between the platter and the motor and see if the platter spins up. So the platter bearing is back in. We'll go ahead and set the platter back down on it. Very gingerly now. It's on there. Go ahead and spin. Spins quite nicely. Okay, now here's where the fun part starts. We have to get the new belt out and wrapped around, and we're going to have to tweak some things. We're going to have to tweak the motor mount so that it's the correct distance, and then we might have to tweak the grommet screws here a little bit for the motor to make sure that the motor is at the right height for this to grab on at the right position. Okay, one nice new turntable belt. Go ahead and run that around the outside of the platter. This is the first time I've touched one of these, and boy oh boy, now I know how it is that they make the determination so whether the belt's spent on this or not. I don't know if you can tell, but this has got a rubbery give to it. At one time, this one did too, but not anymore. It's basically just like paper at this point. So, I don't have this on here exactly the right way at this point. That's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and power it up, and we're going to make sure things spin, and we'll get it adjusted. So I'm going to hold my finger on top of that because I know it's going to try and wind itself up. Well, you couldn't have asked for any easier time with that. I didn't have to adjust anything. I just put the belt on and it took off. At least I didn't have to adjust anything with the height on the motor mount grommets here. That's not to say that I don't still need to do some adjustment with the motor width. I need to get a strobe on here and check the speed. I may have to adjust this to get the speed right on this. Okay, I'm gonna go see if I can hunt down a strobe real quick, and we'll see what's going on. Alright, I went ahead and pulled the strobe disc off my dual turntable. We're just gonna go ahead and kind of wing this. Goes on here. I've got an app on my tablet to flash the LED for a 60 hertz strobe, and we're gonna go ahead and kick this on and check it using that and see if this is even close. You probably won't be able to see it, but I'll film anyway. Got the light off. Start the strobe. We're not real far off. Go ahead and tweak, adjust this just a pinch, I think. Looks pretty much dead on to me. So we'll find out for sure when we go to spin our first record. I will run it against something that I have a digital recording of and know what the playtime is. I'll do that off camera. We'll go ahead and play it all the way through lined up against the digital and find out if the timing lines up properly and if the pitch sounds right. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and turn this off. The next thing we need to do from here is get the Tonearm mounted, and this is where things are going to start to get a little bit funny. I'm going to pull the turntable off of the table here and put the Tonearm in frame, and we're going to do a little bit of work to it first, and I'll show you what's going on with that next. The next thing on this little adventure is the Tonearm. Now, there are things that are on this Tonearm that we have duplicated on the turntable base, and that is specifically this. This is the Tonearm rest that was off of here. Now I'd like, in the vein of keeping this as original as possible, to reuse this. So in order to do that, we need to take off the Tonearm rest that's on here. It looks like that just takes a little Allen key to get the set screw out, and then we take this off. So I'm going to grab that. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead, move that out, move up the cue, and we'll go ahead and undo the set screw here, and should just slide right on out. Okay, so that's out of there now. We'll go ahead and tighten this back up. Perfect. Okay. Put the cue back down here. And now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and put this back off screen after we're done with this segment, and I will go ahead and put the Tonearm rest back onto the turntable base, and then we'll go ahead and put the Tonearm on and see if we can get it lined up appropriately. Well, that was a bit of a pain, but we've got the Tonearm rest back on. Double check and make sure that we're angled appropriately for this. It looks like we are. This is a good deal. Make sure that that's in there, just so the keying goes right. Alright, we have the Tonearm on, sort of. This is where things start to get a little bit more complicated. In order for this to work appropriately, when the stylus is sitting on the vinyl, the stylus needs to be sitting in such a way where the entire Tonearm assembly is parallel to the platter. That way the stylus isn't sitting down in the groove tilted like this or tilted like this. Okay, so the next thing we need to do based on that is we need to go ahead and get the platter cover back on here. We need to set a piece of vinyl down on here. Then we need to get the head shell and the cartridge mounted so that we can make sure that we get this set at the right height. Alright, just a brief update before we continue on with the Tonearm mounting. The weather was just nice enough this evening to take this outside and start on the stain. This is how the stain is turning out so far. It should be much darker. We'll probably have to go another two-ish passes at it, but this is called Bombay Mahogany. It'll be dark with just a slightly reddish tint to it when it's done. Figured that'll look nice with the grays and the blacks. So, alright, let's go ahead and get back to working on the Tonearm assembly. A brief backtrack before we continue with the Tonearm. I realized that I missed a step when we were doing all the mounting on the bottom side of the turntable base. We forgot to permanently affix the Tonearm mount with the nuts and the locking washers that came with it. So I'm gonna do that real quick off camera, and then we'll continue with the Tonearm mounting. Now, this next procedure is not, or at least shouldn't be, particularly difficult to complete, but it's extremely important. And the procedure that I'm talking about is we need to get the Tonearm at the right height so that when the stylus sits on the vinyl, the Tonearm itself is parallel to the platter. If you don't do that, then the stylus will either lean forward in the groove rolling backward in the groove, and that will cause issues with distortion or loss of sound quality otherwise, and we really don't want to do that. So it's really important that you get this correct if you're doing anything like this. Okay, I believe that we are at level with this tone arm. Just to verify that to be the case, I will have to go hunt it down, but I do have a tiny bubble level that I can check this with. I'll do that off camera, but for all intents and purposes, if this is more than maybe half a degree off in either direction, I would be pretty surprised. So I believe I have the tone arm properly balanced now. I don't have the vinyl on here anymore, but if I move the cue up, put it over here, I'll go ahead and leave the cover on the cartridge right now because that'll help simulate the thickness of the vinyl. Go ahead and drop the cue, and when the cue drops, now you can't see it real well, but the tone arm is about as level as you can humanly get. If I put a bubble level on this, it's pretty much dead on. It's close enough that with the stylus in the groove, it shouldn't cause us any issues. So we're going to go ahead and go with this. This is where we're going to leave the video. Now I know the plinth isn't finished yet, and the plinth is going to continue to be unfinished because the weather has continued to not cooperate this week. This plinth unfortunately has been kind of the difficult child with this project, but by the time we finish the next video, which is going to be the calibration of this tone arm and the calibration of the motor distance to make sure that the platter speed's correct here, this should be finished, and we'll be able to show this project in its completely finished state. Now, next time, as far as calibration goes, things that we're going to need to work on include, we need to get the counterweight up here, backed out, and set to balance the tone arm. Then we need to zero this out and set the tracking force. And I'll have to look up what the tracking force is for this. The tracking force is dependent on the cartridge that you install. And for reference sake, that in this case is an Artifon OM5E. Now, I'm sure anybody watching this that does audiophile quality vinyl playback will kind of may scoff at that a little bit. It's a cheaper end cartridge, but I've got one of these on my dual 1009, and I've absolutely enjoyed it. It's got a 20 hertz to 20K frequency response range, and it matched up well with the tracking force, with the weight of this tone arm, so that the resonance on the tone arm is just in the right range. And I'll go into more of that when we do the next video. But I like how this sounds. It's got a nice neutral sound to it. And, well, honestly, you know, they say that you want to be able to go up to 22 or 25K. Well, I've tested my hearing. I can't hear above 17K anymore anyway. So for this to have frequency response up to 20 is plenty good for me. So we've got the counterweight that we need to deal with. We've got to get the tracking force set on that. We need to take the protractor across the platter here, and then make sure that we get our cartridge distance set right. And then we need to get the wires hooked up to the cartridge. Then we need to get the anti-skate set so that it matches the tracking force for the cartridge. And then we'll be ready to start doing some vinyl playback. And at the end of this next video, that's exactly what we'll do. I don't have anything that's not copyright, so I will play just a few snippets of a few different pieces of vinyl. I haven't decided what that is yet, but if you come back next time and watch the end of the series, you will find out. With that said, Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see everybody in the next one.